All right, Chevron Zoom, you still hear me all right? Incredible. Moshe David Artman, are you on the airplane? Oh my gosh. First, Moshe David Artman joining us from the flight, the El Al flight back from Eretz Yisrael. Incredible. All right, wow. Someone else is driving, although I can't see who that is. Ah, Rav Gedalia. Rav Gedalia is also in Eretz Yisrael still, right? Wow. Incredible. Josh, your father's on somewhere in Eretz Yisrael. Rav Gedalia, put in the chat where you are. All right, Shabbos say good morning. Good morning. Let us begin. So, I just have to mention, it's so beautiful. We have Moshe David Artman on the flight back from Eretz Yisrael, is on Zoom. Rabbi Gedalia Rosenblum is driving somewhere in Eretz Yisrael. Looks like, I don't know, the north, the south. No, south it looks like desert. Is joining us from the car in Eretz Yisrael. Incredible. Okay, so with that, we are going to begin. All right, well, let me first thank the sponsors. Thank all of our sponsors for this morning's daf. To thank our Talmud Torah sponsors. 1 second. To thank our Talmud Torah sponsors for the month of Shvat. Mrs. Bracha Shimmer for dedicating Ob Shimmer Joshua this month in memory of her husband, Avram Ben Kalman Eliezer Halevi Zichron Livracha. Ayala and Sarah Steinberg for dedicating the Shurim this month in the Schusar of Shalima for Shulamis Bas Susha. To thank our Daf Yomi sponsors for today, Baruch Fischel and Sonia Kozlavsky and family in commemoration of the 9th yahrzeit of Baruch Fischel's mother, Mrs. Rose Kozlavsky, Rachel Bas Leib Fischel, Zichron Livracha. We hope that in the merit of our Talmud Torah, all of the Neshamas Lav and Aliyah, the families of Nechama, and those who require a refuah should have one together with Kol Cholei Yisrael. With that, let us begin. I totally forgot to do a dramatic job building up today's daf, as it is overwhelmingly fantastic, incredible, and beautiful. But Amir Hashem, right, I'll make up for it. In the daf itself. So we'll say, let's begin. Today's daf is Chaf Gimel 23, and we are picking up Amir Hashem at the 2 dots on Chaf Beis Amud Beis 22b at the 2 dots. Harini Nazir va'at va'amra amen. Mishnah said, Rachel is married to Ruvain. Rachel says, I am a Nazir. Sorry. Ruvain says, I am a Nazir. Sorry. Too much going on here. Okay. Fine. Ruvain says, I am a Nazir. Harini Nazir, va'at, and you. Va'amra amen. And Rachel says, me too. Amen, yes. So what's the halacha? Mefer eshelo v'shelo kayim. Ultimately, again, he is able to go ahead and annul her neder, and his neder still remains. Fine. Or minu, we quoted another brayse. Harini Nazir va'at. So if Ruvain says, I'm a Nazir, and you, va'amra amen, and she says, yes, shnehem asurin, then they are both a Nazir. Ve'im lav, but if she did not answer amen, shnehen mutarin. Ultimately, again, they're both mutter. In other words, neither is a Nazir. Mipnei, why? Shetala nidro b'nidra. Because halach lemaisa, they have intertwined their nidram. In other words, the way the Brisa understands this is Ruvain says, Harini Nazir, va'at. He says, I'm a Nazir and you. And effectively what he's saying is, I'll be a Nazir if you're a Nazir. Shabbosai, this contradicts our Mishnah. Because the way our Mishnah understood Harini Nazir va'at is, Ruvain says, I'm a Nazir. Right? Declarative statement. Va'at, what do you want to do? But they're not intertwining their statements, or they're not intertwining their kabbalos. So what's going on over here? On Rav Yehuda, Tani Meifresh Shalav v'Shalo Kaim. So Rav Yehuda says, you're right, the Brisa has a mistaken text. Align the Brisa together with the Mishnah, and instead it should say, he's able to annul her neder, but his neder remains. Abaye on Abaye says, no. Afilu tema kidiktani Brisa. The reality is, the Brisa can be read as it is. Also, how do you distinguish? This is fascinating. Kigon, Damarla, Harini Nazir Va'at, Dikatali Nidro Binidra, top of Chav Gimel, Umasnisin Kigon Da'amar La, Harini Nazir Va'at Mai. Rabbi say, listen to this. 2 different cases. 2 cases. Let me work backwards. The Mishnah's case is where, as we just said, he's saying Harini Nazir. Rabbi say, what does Harini Nazir mean? What does Harini Nazir mean? I am a Nazir. Right? And I'm a Nazir independent of whatever you're going to do. Rachel, I'm a Nazir, right? Reuven says, I'm a Nazir. Va'at means, what would you like to do? but whatever you do or don't do has absolutely no impact on me. In the Bryce's case, Rabbi say, what is Ruvain doing? In the Bryce's case, Ruvain is going ahead and intertwining, thank you, intertwining his neder with hers. He's saying, Harini Nazir va'at. I'll be a Nazir if you're a Nazir. And that's why the Brisa says, if halacha l'maisa, she accepts, then they're both Nazirim. If she doesn't accept, then they're not Nazirim. So two different cases. Mishum hachi, therefore, again, Abba said, therefore, in the Mishnah's case, so therefore we understand in the Brisa, if she accepts, he can't annul anyone's neder. Why? Because their nedarim are intertwined. In the Mishnah's case, where their nedarim are not intertwined, he has the ability to be made for her neder, but of course he doesn't have the ability to be made for his own. Beautiful. So everyone will say the sugi ends off with just two last cases. Incredible. Mishnah. Ha'isha shenadra b'nazir v'haisa shosi b'yayin. We'll say very interesting. We've actually seen all of this quoted before. A woman took a neder naziros. So Rachel, keep with Rachel and Ruvain. Rachel went ahead and became a nazira. And what happened? Vaisa shosa b'yayin m'tamei l'meisim. And she's drinking wine and becoming tamei l'meisim. So what's the halacha? Harei zeh sofeges es harboim. She gets malchus. Why does she get malchus? Because she's violating her neder naziros. Okay, there's no chiddush in that. Now watch this. Hefer la baila v'hilo yada shehefer la baila. We'll say what happens in the following case. Let's just play this out. Rachel becomes a nazira on a Wednesday. Harini nazira on a Wednesday. What happens? Come Friday, Ruvain hears about the neder. Now, is Ruvain allowed to be made for the neder 2 days later? Yeah, assuming that what? Right. So again, remember, b'yom sham'o means this is the first day he ever heard about the neder. So on Friday, he's made for the neder. Actually, let's make it easier. On Thursday, he's made for the neder. She makes the neder on Wednesday. On Thursday, he's made for the neder. Meanwhile, Rabbi will say, what is she doing? Comes Thursday. So he's made for the neder Thursday morning. Thursday, she goes wild. She's drinking wine, going to levayas, right, like nobody's business. And what happens? So meanwhile, I will say, is she in violation of anything? No. Why? Because Reuven has already been made for the neder. But here's what's interesting. Rachel doesn't know. So as far as Rachel's concerned, what is Rachel doing? She is violating the terms of her neder naziris. But in actuality, she's not, because her husband was made for it. So what's the halacha? She doesn't get malchus. So we'll say, really no chiddush there. Why doesn't she get malchus? Why does she get malchus? She didn't do anything. In other words, I want to be clear. She thinks she's doing something, right? She has no idea that Ruvain was already made for the neder. But in actuality, she did nothing because halacha l'maisa, her husband already annulled the neder. Therefore, no malchus. I will say, so just want to be clear. Case number one, these are seemingly two very straightforward cases. Case number one, Rachel became a nazira. She goes out on Wednesday, and Wednesday she goes out and she drinks wine and goes to levayas. What's the halacha? She gets malchus. Straightforward case. Case two, she becomes a nazir on Wednesday. Ruvain is made for it on Thursday. She doesn't know that Ruvain annulled the neder on Thursday. On Thursday after he does it on Thursday morning. Thursday afternoon, she drinks wine, goes to levayas. What's the halacha? She doesn't get malchus. I will say, now watch this. Rabbi Huda says, "Im eno safek es asar boim tispog makas mardos." I will say, this is incredible. Rabbi Huda says, well, 1 second. Even though she's not going to get malchus for violation of her neder nazirus, she will get malchus mardos. So we'll say, what's malchus mardos? Rabbinic lashes. The rabbis, the Chazal, have the ability to impose malchus on someone who may not be in technical legal violation of the law, but who is clearly flouting the legal system. Right? That's malchus mardos. In other words, okay, are you technically doing anything wrong? No. Technically, you've done nothing wrong. But are you behaving appropriately? Absolutely not. So if Rabbi Yehuda says, in this case over here, Rachel is true on Thursday, when she goes to Levayas, when she drinks wine, is she doing anything legally wrong? Is she doing anything legally wrong? What's the answer? Anything legally wrong? No, not at all. But is this appropriate behavior? No, because she thinks that she's violating her neder nazirus. Rabbi Yehuda says, she gets malchus mardus. Suppose I take a quick look at Rashi. Rabbi Yehuda Omer tispog malchus mardus imlon is chayvu b'malchus min haTorah, because she's not going to be chayeves malchus min haTorah. Right? There's no biblical obligation, because remember, her husband was made for the neder nazirus. Nevertheless, teiloke malchus midrabanon kadei lo hochicha shelo tehei mezida. We'll say, in other words, Rabbi Yehuda feels there has to be some repercussion for her flagrant behavior. Because if there's not some type of response to this type of flagrance, then at the end of the day, what keeps a person from actively violating the system? So if Rabbi Yehuda holds that the Shimakis Mardis in such a situation like this. Beautiful. That's the Mishnah. So we'll say, let's analyze this. So we'll say, we're introduced over here to a really fascinating idea that sometimes, even when you have not technically violated something, there could still be at least rabbinic liability for non-technical violation. I will say, and you understand it, right? You understand this case because at the end of the day, I will say, has Rachel done something wrong? Has Rachel done something wrong? So let's analyze this for just a moment. So technically, she has not done something wrong. Technically, she hasn't done something wrong, right? Again, she has not violated the Neder Nazir. She has not done, in other words, again, what Avera Rachel have you violated? Has Rachel violated any Avera? No, absolutely not. And you can't argue any other way. She hasn't. But has she done something wrong? She has. Because as far as she knew, she was wantonly violating a Neder Naziros. The fact that technically it turned out that she did nothing wrong doesn't change the fact that on a personalistic, spiritual level, this was not the right activity to engage in. I will say, now, the fact that there's liability for activity like that is a pretty interesting chiddush. So let's analyze. So let's analyze this. Isha fe'ram Hashem yislach la. So the Torah over here, when speaking about the ability for a husband to annul the wife's neder. So what does the pasuk say? Her husband was mefer the neder. Her husband annulled the neder. V'Hashem yislach la, and Hashem will forgive her. Rabbi say, well, the pasuk doesn't make sense. Why doesn't the pasuk make sense? If the husband annulled the neder, then what is divine forgiveness for? To which the Gemara says, "Be'isha shehefer la baila v'hi lo yada kasav medaber." Watch this, I will say, because ultimately, again, we're talking about a situation where a woman made a neder, she violated the neder, but before she violated the neder, her husband had in fact annulled the neder. So in reality, when she violated, she wasn't really violating anything because the neder was already annulled, and yet ultimately, again, shehi tzricha kapara uslicha, that she still requires atonement and forgiveness. Even though, halacha l'maaseh, technically, she didn't do anything wrong, the pasuk says, even though her husband annulled the neder, and therefore she didn't technically do anything wrong, Vashem yislach la, but because she thought she was doing something wrong, ultimately, that requires kapara and slicha, requires atonement and forgiveness. Moses, isn't that beautiful? This is, Ukishaya magia Rabbi Akiva, Eitza pasuk zeh. I was saying, we just had the schos to stand. When was it? What's today? Wednesday, right? Last Tuesday night, we had the great zuchos, Baruch Hashem, to be in Tveria, to stand literally in the kever of Rabbi Akiva and learn some of Rabbi Akiva's Torah. So Rabbi Akiva, Zecher Tzadik v'Kadosh Levracha, Zechusa Yagin Alein. Rabbi Akiva, when he would get to this pasuk, Hayabocha, he would cry, and he would say as follows: Ummah Mishinis kavin lalos biyado basar chazer, va'ala biyado basar tala. Shamiki will say, listen, imagine you have a person, I will say, who has in mind teeth chazer, right? He has in mind teeth chazer. Listen to this. In other words, he says, Hineni muchan umezuman le'achol chazer. L'shem yichol kudsha. Right? In other words, right? He's ready to eat chazer. And what happens? There's a mix-up, and he ends up eating kosher meat. So he hasn't done, in other words, his kavana was for an aveira, but mamish, he did not do an aveira. He ate a piece of meat with 17 ashkachas on it, right? So we'll say, listen to this. Nevertheless, ta'un kapara uslicha, he still requires kapara and slicha. We'll say, right? You still require kapara and slicha. We'll say, because you see, or what do you see? I will say, at the essence, what is chait? What is chait? Chait is not just simply a physical act. Chait is a mindset. Chait is where a person stands ready to walk away from HaKadosh Baruch Hu. I'm ready to go ahead, not turn my back, because even when I sin, I don't turn my back. But when I sin, I distance myself. And when I'm ready to sin, I'm ready to distance myself from HaKadosh Baruch Hu. A readiness to distance oneself from the Ribono Shel Olam, even if you don't actually physically do that in the act, but the readiness to do it is catastrophic as well. The readiness to do it is tragic as well. And just simply having the cognitive readiness to distance myself from the Ribono Shel Olam generates a certain level of liability. So Rabbi Akiva says again, a person had in mind to eat chazer, and it turns out the piece of meat he ate wasn't chazer, it was 100% kosher. Yet a person still requires ton kaparo slicha, still requires atonement. I'm miscaving lalos biyado basar chazer. All the more so a person who has intention to sin and ultimately does sin, alachas kama v'kamo, all the more so requires atonement. I will say it's such a different way of looking about the almost like cognitive component of sin. When we think about chait, we're often focused on chait as a maisa, right? There's an action of sin, but at the end of the day, we don't think about the cognitive impact of sin. The cognitive impact of sin, I will say, is that when I stand ready to do something that is contrary to the ratzon habore, that changes me as a person. That changes me. Rabbi Soloveitchik speaks about this in his essays on Tshuva, where the Rav writes that every sin generates two things. Well, he says if you look at Yom Kippur discusses two things. There's slicha and kapara. Slicha and kapara. So ultimately, he says kapara is for onesh. Every chait brings with it onesh, and every chait brings with it tumah. Two different things. When I sin, every sin comes with culpability and liability. Every sin carries a punishment. So that's onesh. But every sin also generates tumah. It also generates a certain sense of impurity. I'm impugning my inherent holiness. And that's why, again, in Yom Kippur, there is tara and kapara. Kapara ultimately takes away the onesh, right? So atonement takes away the onesh, and tara takes away the tumah. You know what the Gemara is telling us over here? He'll say, when I stand ready to sin, but it turns out that actually I didn't end up sinning. So therefore, there's no what? There's no onesh. There's no punishment. But what is there? There's tumah. There's tumah. Because any time I stand ready to walk away from HaKadosh Baruch Hu, I'm creating tumah, we translate as impurity, but tumah really means a void of purity, an area that is devoid of purity. Whenever I go ahead and I stand ready to walk away from the Ribono Shel Olam, that creates a tumah. That tumah requires a remedy. That tumah requires addressing. It's so incredible. And Rabbi Akiva, we'll say why Rabbi Akiva cried about this. If we have time, which we definitely will not, but if we have time, at some point over the Daf Yomi cycle, you'll remind me. Kiyotze b'davra ata omer. The pasuk says, we'll say this is by an asham talui. Remember again, the case of an asham talui is a person does something and he's unsure whether or not his act generated liability. So you bring an asham talui. He didn't know that he was culpable and he will bear his sin. So the Gemara says, person will say, so now these are all different nuanced cases, all highlighting the same theme. Someone who had in mind to eat kosher meat, and he ended up eating chazer. So we'll say this was a guy who wanted to do the right thing, but ended up doing the wrong thing. For example, kigon, chaticha, suffix shel shuman, suffix shel chelev. We'll say there was a piece of meat, one piece of meat, and it was unclear. Is it chelev? Is it shuman? And ultimately you ate it and you're not sure what it was. Amar kravana savono. You have to go ahead and bring in ashtam talui. So we'll say that's in a suffix case. Mishan is kaving lalos b'yodo basar chazer va'alo b'yodo basar chazer alachas kama v'kama. So we'll say if there's liability for potential sin, certainly there's going to be liability for actual sin. Same theme. What Chazal are dramatically drawn to is this idea. Rabbi says you see over here the severity of chait. You see the severity of chait, and if there's going to be some level of liability for potential infraction, then all the more so for definitive infraction. The Gemara says, "Isi ben Yehuda," Isi ben Yehuda says, "V'lo yada v'ashev v'nasav." No, same passage I just quoted before. Uma mishnis kavin lalos biyado basar talava ala biyado basar chazer. Someone wanted to eat kosher meat, but ended up eating non-kosher meat. For example, could go shtei chatichos. So we'll say Isi ben Yehuda, as opposed to the previous case where we illustrated this with chaticha achos, one piece, and there was something about the identity of the piece of meat. Isi ben Yehuda deals with this case with one piece of meat. One piece of meat. Ultimately, again, I'm sorry. Before, there was one piece of meat. Isi ben Yehuda deals with the case of two pieces of meat. One is kosher, one is not kosher, and you don't know which one you ate. You still bear liability. Hamiskavin la'alos biyado basar chazer va'Allah biyado basar chazer alachas kama v'kama. Someone who wanted to sin and in fact ends up sinning. Of course, we understand the liability. Al davar zeh yidvu hadavim. They will say about this, sensitive people are incredibly pained. In other words, they will say, what does this mean? So now suddenly I begin to realize how careful I have to be with my actions. That even, I will say, it's not just about technical behaviors. It's about going through life with the right kavanas and the right mindsets as well. And I will say, we know this, right? This really, I said this story over to someone, just very, very quickly. I had this situation. This is a couple of years ago. It was actually at Kiddush, and I was holding a glass of wine. And it was right after Kiddush. I was holding a glass of wine, and someone walked right into me. I told this story to someone. Someone walked right into me, and the wine spilled on me. And the person said, "Not my fault. Not my fault. Not my fault." I was like, okay, not my fault, not my fault. And it was fascinating. First of all, he was an attorney. Okay, that's it's a temperate, right? Which is the thing. No, but I think it does happen, whatever. It's but I would say, but what was fascinating, I was like, okay, and if it was your fault, it's okay also. It's okay also. In other words, that's okay. So I would say, and I realized, like, what is this guy walking around? Like, he's walking around with a mindset. I don't know. I don't really know this person well, but I'm saying, like, to me, like, what that represented was a mindset of everything is looked at through the lens of fault, not fault, mutter aser, right? Tomei treif. And while that's true, that is an element. What the Gemara sensitizes as well says, your kavanas in life play a big role in who and what you are as well. What's your mindset? In other words, so you could be a person who is in the technical right. I haven't done anything wrong. But if your kavanas and your hashkafas and your outlooks on life and your orientation and your aspirations and your goals and your convictions are not right, there's liability for that as well. It's not liability. That's the Gemara sensitizing us to. Just as important as your actions are your thoughts, your dreams, your goals, your aspirations, your hashkafas, your commitments, your fidelities. All of those things are just as important as the way that you act. And if they're flawed, the Gemara says, there's kapara, there's slicha, that's necessary for that as well. It's such an incredibly overwhelming idea. And that's why the Gemara says, sensitive people are very distressed. Because I will say, sensitive people think. Right? And ultimately, when you begin to think about this, you realize the expectations that HaKadosh Baruch Hu has of us, not just on an actional level, but on a cognitive, feeling, emotional level as well. So incredibly profound. The Gemara goes weiter. The Gemara says, good. Isi ben Yehuda, good. So I'll say now the Gemara says, why do we need all these cases? In other words, all of these cases seem to be, all of these opinions seem to be illustrating the same idea, which is what? That even if technically, actionally you didn't do anything wrong, but if Lamaisi you had flawed kavanas, there's liability for that as well. So why do you need to illustrate in all these different ways? To which the Gemara says, I'll tell you why. Ditana gabi isha, would have just said the case by the woman, Hasam hu debaya kaparo slicha, in the case of the Nazira. If would have just said that case, that's where she requires kaparo slicha. Why? Mishum demei karali isura ichavin. Rabbi say in the case of the Nazira, remember again, when Rachel goes out and drinks wine and goes to Levayas, Rabbi say, what's her kavana? To violate her Nazirus. In other words, that's her kavana. That's her kavana to violate the neder. Okay, so I understand that case. She has explicit intent to violate the terms of her nazirus. So I understand why in a case like that, halacha lemaisa, there should have to be some type of slicha v'chapara. Avachaticha, safek shel chelev, safek shel shumen delateri chavin, lo by kaparo slicha. But I was saying, in the case, ultimately, again, the piece of meat, you're not sure if it's chelev, you're not sure if it's right, kosher, treif, and you eat it. My intention wasn't for iser. Right, my intention was tidi because I thought ultimately again it's going to be mutter. So maybe in that case there wouldn't be slicha v'chapara. Therefore, I need to be taught that even in that case there needs to be slicha v'chapara. V'it mar hada, and if would have just said the case of the chaticha, safek shel chelev, safek shel shuman, the ikay surah, because they will say there's a real possibility of isser. Aval isha, the hefer la baila de atera, loti bai slicha v'chaparo slicha. I will say, going back to the Nazir case, here's what interesting in the Nazir case, I will say. In the case of chaticha, safek, right, if I have a piece of meat and it's a safek, it's kosher or treif, there's a real possibility of isser. In the case of the woman whose husband annulled her neder Nazir Rabosai, in reality, although she thinks she's violating something, there's absolutely no isser involved. So maybe there shouldn't need to be any slicha v'chapara. Therefore, the Gemara needs to teach you that no, even in that case, there's slicha v'chapara. V'i itmar hani tarti, and if we just said the first two cases, hava mina hani tarti hu desagi lahon b'kaparo slicha, de lo ikba isura. I would have said the first two cases. Ultimately, again, you could have slicha v'chapara. Why? Because there's no fixed isser. Either in case number one, because she's actually not really in a Nazir anymore. Case number two, because it's a suffix, whether or not the piece of meat is kosher or treif. But I will say in the case of two pieces of meat, where I know what? I know for sure one of them is kosher, one of them is treif, where there's definitely isser there. Therefore, maybe lo sagile v'chaparo slicha. Maybe again that's treated just like a bona fide sin, and simple slicha v'chapara is not enough. Kamash malon deloshna. Therefore, I will say the Gemara teaches me that halacha l'maisa ultimately there's no distinction. So therefore, I will say three cases essentially. Case number one: Rachel made a neder nazirus on Wednesday. Her husband annulled it on Thursday morning. She goes out and drinks wine on Thursday afternoon. Even though technically she's done nothing wrong, she still requires slicha v'chapara. Case two, there's a piece of meat, suffix kosher, suffix treif. I eat it. Ultimately, technically, I may have not done nothing wrong, still requires slicha v'chapara. Case three, two pieces of meat, one of them chelev, one of them treif, one of them kosher. Not sure which is which. I eat one of them. Because if I eat both of them, obviously there's definitive liability. I eat one of them. Halacha l'maisa liability. In all of these cases, I may have not done anything wrong. It's possible I may have not done anything wrong on a technical level, but l'maisa, because my kavanas, right, because my intentions are broken, and because my intentions are flawed, and my intentions are skewed, then at the end of the day, there is some element of tara, there is some element of purification, of forgiveness that is necessary in these cases. The takeaway message, Rabbi say, it's not just what you do that matters. It's how you think. It's what your kavanas are that play a role in the totality of your personality as well. The Gemara goes right. They will say first wide line, end of the first wide line. My dichsiv. They will say this is such an incredible Gemara. My dichsiv, what's the meaning? Ki yisharim darchei Hashem v'tzadikim yelchu bam uposhim yikashlu bam. So we'll say here's the pasuk. The ways of Hashem are yashar, are straight. The righteous will walk on them, but the wicked will stumble. So I will say, just to understand, so what the pasuk seems to be describing over here is, there is a derech Hashem, there is a path of Hashem. On that path of Hashem, the tzaddikim are able to traverse it, but ultimately, again, the Rishayim stumble on that path. So the Gemara says, what does that mean? So I will say, Mashal l'shnei b'nei adam shetzalu pischayim. Listen to this case. This could be compared to two people who roast their carbon pesach. Echad achlu l'shem mitzvah. One guy ate his carbon pesach for the purpose of a mitzvah. Ve'echad achlu l'shem achila gasa. And one ultimately went ahead and ate it achila gasa. What's achila gasa? Achila, like gluttonous eating. In other words, we'll say that actually the halacha is carbon pesach is nechal al hasova. Right? In other words, carbon pesach is not, when the Beis HaMikdash will stand in Mir Hashem, carbon pesach, the Paschal lamb, is not your primary meal. The carbon pesach is actually dessert, afikoman. It's the dessert. But the idea is you have to pace yourself over the course of the meal, that when you, kind of like afikoman as well, that when you get to the carbon pesach, you're not like, oh God, right? You know that feeling, right? That's like afikoman, right? Afikoman, right? Somebody brings out, you're like your kids, it's okay, don't find it, you know, it's fine, right? We're good over here, we're good here, right? So I'll say, so l'maisa again, so the Gemara says, what can it be compared to? There's a guy who eats carbon pesach and he eats it right with an appetite. That's a mitzvah. There's another guy who eats achila gasa, gluttonous consumption, and that's an aveira. So the Gemara says, Zusha achlu mitzvah tzadikim yelchubon. So we'll say the one who eats it right in a proper way. That's derech Hashem that the tzadikim are traversing. And the one who eats it achila gasa, that's considered to be the ways of the wicked who are stumbling on the pathway of Hashem. So the pathway of Hashem in this context is the consumption of the Karban Pesach. The righteous person will walk on that path the right way and eat the Karban Pesach in an appropriate way. The Rasha will stumble on that path and he will go and eat Karban Pesach in a gluttonous fashion. Amar Reish Lakish, whoa. Hi, Rasha Karisle, because a guy eats Karban Pesach, Achila Gas, okay, he ate too much during the Suda. So now it's a shtekel gluttonous by the Achilas Karban Pesach. You're going to call him a Rasha because of that? He's still doing the mitzvah. Okay, he's not doing the mitzvah in the right way, but he's still doing the mitzvah. Nihidilo ka'avid mitzvah min amuvchar Pesach miya ka'avid. Okay, I got it. He's not doing the mitzvah in the ideal way, but he's still eating Karban Pesach. And I was about to say, can't call a guy like that a Rasha. So let's find another mashal. Ela mashal l'shnei b'nei Adam. So I will say, this is an interesting mashal. Ela mashal l'shnei b'nei Adam. Ze ishto v'zeh achoso imo. V'zeh ishto v'zeh achoso imo. There's a guy who's traveling with two women, right? One is his wife, one is his sister. L'zeh, and he has, right, each of the men have relations that night. L'zeh nizdamnu lo ishto, u'l'zeh nizdamnu lo achoso. One ends up having relations with his wife. One ends up having relations with his sister. There must be more to this story, right? There must be more to this story. Again, we're going to reject the mashal anyway in just a moment, as you're going to see. The one who ends up being with his wife, that's the pathway of tzaddikim. The Gemara says, 1 second, I don't understand what that means. Me dummy, that can't be what the pasuk is talking about. Anan kamiran chada derech hachash nedrachim. That was like, that doesn't fit. That besides the fact that, again, and Mepharshim point out, the mashal itself is also just a strange mashal, but that's not what the pasuk is talking about. What the pasuk is talking about is a pathway, one thing, and when the tzaddik does it, it's an incredible aliyah, and when the Rasha does it, it's an incredible yerida. One thing. The mashal doesn't work because the wife and the sister are two different people. So what's the mashal? So what's incredible? Ella, here it is. Mashal lalot ushtei benosav. I will say it's comparable. By the way, this is why the Gemara gave the let's go back there. It could be comparable, say, to the story of Lot and his two daughters. Remember again, Lot had relations with both of his daughters, those from whom Ammon and Moab come from. Now I will say, remember again, Hein sheniskavnu l'shem mitzvah v'tzadikim yelchu bam. Hu sheniskavnu l'shem avera uposhtem yikashlu bam. I will say, listen to this. The daughters of Lot acted l'shem shamayim. Remember, Rashi HaKadosh points out on the pasuk, why did the daughters of Lot seduce their father? Why? They thought the world ended. They didn't realize it was just Sodom and Amorah, the 5 cities that were destroyed. They thought the entire world was destroyed, and they thought they were the last two women, and their father was the last man on this world. So they thought, in order to recreate the human race, they had to do what they had to do. They had a kavanah l'shem shamayim. Lot, on the other hand, what was Lot's kavanah? Lot's kavanah was just for immorality. So I will say, here you see something amazing. It's the same act. Yet the daughters of Lot had a kavanah l'shem shamayim, and Lot himself has a kavanah for immorality. Same act, same derech. Yet for the daughters, it's kiviyachol avodas Hashem. For Lot, one of the worst averos possibly imaginable. Same act. I will say, by the way, now you begin to see the connection between this Gemara and the previous sugya. I will say, what did we learn in the previous sugya? What did we learn? Kavana matters. And I will say, by the way, not just in davening, right? I don't think about kavana, think about davening, not just in life. What are your kavanas? So you know what the etymology of kavana? We translate kavana ultimately again as concentration. But what is kavana really? Kavan is kivun, a direction. Where are you going in life? What are you doing? What am I trying to accomplish? Who am I trying to be? That's what kavana is. So again, going back to the previous sugya, when I have intention to commit an avera, wrong kivun. It's wrong direction. I'm going the wrong way in life. Kavana, kivun, direction, goals, aspirations matter. And now this is the natural progression. That's why you could have the same act. And for one person, it's avodas Hashem, and for another person, it is the worst avera possibly imaginable. To which the Gemara said, maybe Lot also had good intentions. How do you know that Lot had intention for immorality, right? Maybe Lot also had kavanah l'shem shamayim. The Gemara says, Rabbi Yochanan kol hapasuk hazal shem aver nemar. So what the Gemara says is the entire pasuk, which is Vayisa. So we'll say the pasuk is Vayisa Lot es einov vayar al kikar hayardei kula mashke. So we'll say we're going to see that every time, well, many times when the Torah discusses Lot and his actions, the same words are used in the context of immorality. So, for example, the pasuk says, "Vayisa Lot vatisa eshes adona b'senel." So, same lashon. Lot lifted his eyes. Same lashon by Eshes Potiphar when she tried to seduce Yosef. Ki hi yeshara be'enai vayar osa Shechem. Lot saw, right? Shechem saw before he took and abused Dinah. Eis kol hakikar hayarden ki ba'ad isha zona ad kikar lechem ki kula mashke elcha achari moavai nosni lachmi umemai samriyo pishtish mana v'shikuyai. So also the point over here is that the pasuk by Lot, when he chose to move to Sodom, the wording that the Torah uses are all words that are found in the context of immorality, which tells us, I will say, why did Lot move to Sodom? Why did Lot move to Sodom? Why? Because he wanted to be in a place of incredible immorality. I will say, and the immorality of Lot is seen, by the way, the immorality of Lot is already seen before this episode with his two daughters, right? Where is the true immorality of Lot seen? Remember again when he's harboring the guests, the malachim, in Sodom, and they want to bang down the door, they want the guests. Remember again, Lot, in this like ridiculously skewed act of hospitality and piety, what does he do? He offers his two unmarried daughters to this mob, to this mob, right? In other words, not knowing what ultimately, again, well, knowing full well what's going to happen to his daughters if he goes and gives, but yet again, that's so Lot already was steeped in immorality even before the episode with his daughters. So the Ma'aseh gets Rabbosai. So this Vidilma hunam l'shum mitzvah chavin, but maybe Lot still had kavanah for a mitzvah. I'm sorry. So the Gemara says v'ha menes anis. But 1 second, Lot was an ones. Rabbosai, Lot was drunk. Lot was drunk, right? And he was so drunk. Remember again, Rabbosai, there's a concept of shichruso shel Lot, which is right getting Lot drunk. What does it mean? And this is important, right? Because it comes up by Hilchos Purim that the post can bring down that even though one is supposed to become inebriated on Purim, one has to avoid shichruso shel Lot. What's Lot drunk? Lot drunk is when you literally don't know the difference between right and wrong. See, he was in ones, same circumstances. So the Gemara's term of Yossi, Rabbi Choni, nakud al vav uvikuma shel bechira. I will say, why is there a dot on top of the vikuma? Right after Lot slept with his oldest daughter, it says ubikuma when she got up. Why is there a dot there? Lomar shebishachva lo yada aval bikuma yada. Lot did not realize what was going on when he had relations with his oldest daughter the first night. But in the morning, when he got up, he realized what happened. And therefore, what should he have done? Suppose listen to this. The Gemara says, okay, but what happened. What do you want from him? So fine, he recognized what happened. He recognized what happened when she got up, but it already occurred. You can't, my dahava hava. Rabbi say, what a mantra for life. My dahava, what happened. You can't do anything about it. The Gemara says, you're right. Nafkamina de lipanya achrina loiboy lemishte chamra. You're right. What happened. But Lot, what should you have done? The next night, when your daughters offer you wine, you know what you say? No, thank you. No, thank you. I will say, by the way, what a profound statement in the Gemara. So I will say, sometimes in life, we commit terrible things, right? I make terrible mistakes. And I look at my mistakes and I say, what am I supposed to do? What am I supposed to do? How do I live with this? I will say, the Gemara Chazal give us the answer. You know what you do when you see terrible mistakes that you've done? What do you know what you do? My dahava hava. What was. Sometimes I will say, in order to build the future, you have to close the door on the past. And you have to, and again, it doesn't mean you don't do tshuva, and it doesn't mean, but sometimes a person just has to say, my dahava hava. What was. The past is the past. I'm closing the door on that. That was. I can't do anything about it. I can't change it. Close the door. But what should I do? I need to focus on my future. My dahava hava, what was. The past is closed out, but now I have an unwritten present and future in front of me. That's where my efforts are going to go. The most profoundly cathartic way a person could think, my dahava hava, let's move forward. The Gemara goes right to Dash Rava, my dechsiv. Ach nifsha mekerias oz. What is actually beautiful. So Gemara says, what's the meaning of this pasuk? This is a pasuk from Mishlei. Ach nifsha mekerias oz, umidyanim kebriach armon. What's the meaning of this pasuk? I will say, here we go. Ach nifsha mikiryas oz. What does it mean that I have literally again a culpable brother, pesha, a brother who commits averus from kiryas oz? Who is that? Zelot. I will say Chav Gimel base 23b, second line down from the top. Zelot shepir shma Avram. This refers to Lot, who distanced himself from Avram. Right. So Lot is the ach nifsha, right, the culpable brother who separated himself from the city of the strong. Living with Avram Avinu was a city of the strong. Lot separated himself from that. Umiyadim kibriach armon. What does that mean? Shehitil medinim kibrichin va'armon. So ultimately, again, he went ahead and he Lot through his behaviors. Ultimately, I will say, put a briach. A briach is like the bar that you put across the door in order to solidify the door. Lot created bars that would forever keep his offspring out of Klal Yisrael. Lo yavo amoni umoavi b'kal Hashem. Lot, because remember again, the Ammonites and the Moabites are our cousins. But yet, because they are the product, ultimately, again, of such immorality, sure, there are other reasons also. There's like a bar that's put across the door, and they are not permitted to enter into Klal Yisrael. Rava, Rabbi Yitzchak, what's the meaning of the pasuk? L'tava yivakesh nifrad ubechol toshia yiskala. What does this mean? L'tava nivakesh nifrad zelot. This refers to Lot. Ultimately, I will say so. The one who is distanced will seek out every type, and this refers to Lot. Ubechol toshia yiskala sheniskala kolon bate knios is what the midrash shows. That Lot's degradation is revealed in every shul and every base medrash. Tisnan. Amoni umoavi asurin v'isurin isur olam. Incredible. So I will say along the same lines. Amar Avula. Tamar zinsa zimri zina. I will say listen to this. Two more acts of immorality. Right? Tamar committed immorality. I will say how did Tamar engage in immorality? Remember again, she was married to Yehuda's two sons, Er and Ona. They both died. Yehuda has no idea what happened. So Yehuda thinks that it's her fault. So therefore he keeps playing her shah, give you a shayla, give you a shayla. She dresses up as a zona, as a harlot, seduces her father-in-law, right, and ultimately becomes pregnant from her father-in-law. It's an act of znos. Zimri, zina. Zimri, right, Zimri, who was ultimately, again, the man who publicly engaged in immorality with Kozbi Bastsor, the Midianite princess, also engaged in immorality. Tamar zinsa yotzim en malachim unavim. I will say, Tamar, through her act, what did she create? She created, again, Shevet Yehuda, from whom came kings and prophets. Zimri zina, naflu alav kama rivos misrael. Zimri committed immorality, and what happens, Rabbi say? Tens of thousands of Jews. That Rabbi say, it's the same concept that we just saw before. Namely, you could have the same act. One person does it l'shem shamayim, and it creates the most incredible results. Another person does it ultimately, again, for base and immoral reasons, and it creates catastrophic consequences. Rabbi say, here it is. Listen to this Gemara. Rabbi say, so again, all reinforcing the same yesod, that your kavanos, your kivun, your she'ifos, your wants, your desires, your goal, your aspirations, all play a part in who you become. We'll say one more line. Get ready for this. Gedola aver l'shma, mitzvah shelo l'shma. Wow. Right? Great is an aver l'shma. Now I will say, you're thinking to yourself, oh, that's incredible. I do that all the time, aver l'shma. No. Not that kind of Aveira L'Shma, right? So let's say, so ultimately, again, the Rashi points out over here, what's an Aveira L'Shma? Rashi says, Gidol Aveira L'Shma, Kilomar L'Shem Mitzvah. I will say, an Aveira L'Shma means I'm committing, I will say, you know what we're going to do? We're going to stop over here for today. I don't want to rush through it. By the way, we are right on schedule, right? We are fine in Mirat Hashem. Tomorrow, Shor Mitzvah Hashem will start on time. I will say, Shkoyach. Wow. Not finished. Still more to come tomorrow. Incredible sugis. Shkoyach, everyone. Everyone, Zoom, have a great day, everyone. Have a great day. I usually scribble in the margins. Check. Where's Hashem? Amen.